In the middle of the night shift, Detective Ryan Cole and his partner, Olivia Parker, responded to a call from dispatch. A report had come in about screams echoing from an abandoned building in an old industrial area outside the city. The place had been deserted for years, mostly used by vagrants and squatters, but it was also linked to multiple missing person cases. As Ryan gripped the steering wheel, an uneasy feeling settled in his chest. These kinds of calls were usually false alarms, but something in his gut told him this time was different. When they arrived, Olivia switched on her flashlight and scanned the crumbling structure. Graffiti-covered walls, shattered windows, and rusted metal beams loomed before them. They called out over the radio to see if anyone was inside. No response. Ryan rested his hand on his holstered gun and took the first step inside. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. Stains, old, dried blood, marked the cracked concrete floor. Olivia adjusted the body camera strapped to her chest. "We need to document this," she whispered. At first, everything seemed normal, or as normal as an abandoned building could be. The rusted stairs creaked under their weight, and the wind howled through broken glass. But as they moved deeper inside, they started finding personal belongings. A torn necklace, a single shoe, a shredded t-shirt. Olivia pulled out missing persons flyers from her pocket. The faces on the papers matched the abandoned belongings. Ryan muttered under his breath, "Something happened here." Then, a sound. A faint, raspy whisper drifted from the darkness ahead. Ryan swung his flashlight toward the noise, but the corridor was empty. Olivia stiffened, glancing over her shoulder. "Is someone there?" she called out. Silence. Ryan sighed and reached for his radio. "Dispatch, we are investigating an abandoned site at 242 Industrial Road. Requesting backup." Static. No reply. That was when they noticed a door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, they stepped into a room filled with old filing cabinets and shattered desks. But what caught their attention was the rusted iron door standing in the center. Something about it felt wrong. Olivia placed her hand against the cold metal, an involuntary shiver running up her spine. Ryan narrowed his eyes. "This isn't normal," he muttered. They pulled the door open and found a staircase leading downward. The atmosphere shifted, thick with an unexplainable heaviness. As they descended, they noticed deep scratch marks along the walls. Ryan's stomach churned. At the bottom, a dimly lit room awaited them. A single flickering light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows. The walls were plastered with old newspaper clippings, every single one about missing people. Olivia's breath hitched. "Oh my God, they were here." Then the door behind them slammed shut. Olivia let out a sharp scream. Ryan raised his gun, but a shadow slipped through the darkness. A deep whisper echoed through the room. "You won't leave." Ryan's hand trembled as he tried to pull the trigger. Olivia fumbled with the radio, but the walls themselves seemed to groan. A scratching noise grew louder, as if unseen hands were clawing at the surface, desperate to escape. The lock behind them clicked. Ryan slammed his shoulder against the door, but it wouldn't budge. Olivia's eyes darted to the wall where something was carved into the concrete. "Don't run or they'll find you." Her pulse pounded as she met Ryan's gaze. They had to get out. But how? They turned back toward the stairs, but the hallway seemed narrower. The walls were closing in. Olivia flashed her light against them and froze. More words had been freshly etched into the stone. "You will replace us." At that moment, the building plunged into complete darkness. Ryan gripped Olivia's hand. "We'll get through this," he whispered, but his voice trembled with fear. The next morning, when the backup team arrived, the building was empty. There was no sign of Ryan or Olivia, only a fallen radio left on the floor. The claw marks on the walls had multiplied, but the most chilling discovery was the bulletin board at the entrance. 2 new missing persons flyers had been posted overnight. They bore the names and faces of Detective Ryan Cole and Olivia Parker. Officer Jake Holloway was on his night patrol when a crackling transmission came through his radio. It was from an unregistered frequency. "Please, help us. Get us out of here." The voice was muffled and desperate. Jake reached for his radio and responded, "This is 1242. Who is this?" State your location. But there was no reply, only static and faint whispers in between. Jake reported the call to dispatch, but the operator told him that the frequency hadn't been in use for years. Stranger still, the signal appeared to be coming from the old, abandoned Willow Creek police station, shut down in 1987 after a fire. Officers who had worked there before the incident had reported eerie occurrences, but no official explanation was ever given. Intrigued and unsettled, Jake convinced his patrol partner, Sam Carter, to check it out. When they arrived at the station, the entire area was eerily silent. The streetlights were out, and the wind carried the dry rustling of leaves. From the outside, the building looked long forgotten, its windows broken, its facade worn. Just as they hesitated at the entrance, their radios crackled again. "Please, it's so dark. We're here." With a shared glance, they drew their guns and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the lingering scent of smoke. Desks were overturned, chairs lay abandoned, and faded wanted posters hung loosely on the peeling walls. Jake's flashlight flickered momentarily. Then a door creaked open on its own. A faint rustling sound came from inside. With their weapons raised, they pushed the door open. Inside, an old interrogation room stood frozen in time. On the dust-covered table sat an ancient police radio, switched off. And yet, it had transmitted the distress call. Sam hesitated before picking it up, but as he did, a shadow moved behind the one-way mirror. Jake's pulse quickened. Gun drawn, he turned toward the glass. The interrogation room door creaked open wider, revealing something even more unsettling. 4 faded photographs were pinned to the wall, portraits of officers who had served at Willow Creek in 1987. Below them, scrawled in smudged ink, was a chilling message. "We're still here." Before Jake could react, the radio crackled to life once more. "Please, help us. We can't get out." Jake recoiled, his breath hitching. Sam's voice shook. "We need to leave. Now." But before they could move, the door behind them slammed shut. Footsteps echoed through the station's darkened halls. Heavy, unmistakable. Jake and Sam locked eyes. Something was coming. As Jake yanked at the door handle, their radios suddenly fell silent. A dreadful realization crept over him. Whatever was in this building wasn't just a ghostly presence. It was aware. It had been waiting. He kicked the door open, and they bolted down the hall. A whisper followed them, distorted and guttural. "You can't leave us." They stumbled outside, gasping for breath. As they turned back, Jake saw a figure in the station's doorway watching. But its eyes, they weren't human. Then, just like that, the building fell silent again, as if nothing had ever happened. Climbing into their cruiser, they tried to contact dispatch. Only static remained. The next day, Jake went through old case files on Willow Creek. In the reports, 4 officers had mysteriously disappeared shortly before the fire. But what made his blood run cold was an old group photograph. 4 officers stood in uniform, and next to them there was a 5th figure. The silhouette was unmistakable. Jake stared in horror as he recognized his own face in the faded picture. Officer Ethan Reynolds was on his night patrol when he heard the call come through on the radio. "Dispatch, we have a missing child. Last seen near Whispering Pines Village." Child disappearances were always urgent cases, so he wasted no time. Flipping on his sirens, he sped towards the village. Whispering Pines was a small, isolated town near the forest, and at this hour, it was almost completely dark. A sense of unease crept over him as he responded. 10-4, en route to the scene. When Ethan arrived, a group of villagers was waiting. He approached them, gathering information. The missing boy, Noah Bennett, had been walking with his mother when he suddenly vanished. She had only turned her back for a second. "Where did you last see him?" Ethan asked. An elderly man, Walter, pointed towards the forest. He hesitated before speaking. "Every year, on this exact day, a child disappears here," he murmured. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" The old man's voice lowered. 20 years ago, a boy vanished in this very spot. Every year, on the same night, he comes back, and then disappears again. Ethan wasn't in the mood for ghost stories. His job was to find the boy, not listen to superstitions. Some of the villagers whispered amongst themselves, while others locked their doors. Ethan scanned the area with his flashlight. A mother's tear-streaked face pleaded with him. "Please, find my son." He nodded, gripping his radio. "Dispatch, I'm entering the forest near the last known location. Beginning search." The deeper Ethan went into the woods, the colder it became. A thin mist curled around the trees, and the sound of the wind made the branches creak like whispers. His boots sank slightly into the damp earth. Suddenly, his radio crackled with static. "Officer Reynolds?" The voice was distorted. Ethan pressed the button. "Dispatch, say again." No response, just heavy breathing. Then, faintly, he heard something, soft crying. His pulse quickened as he moved toward the sound, and then he saw him. A small figure stood by the base of a tree, facing away from him. His black hair was disheveled and his clothes looked old. "Noah?" Ethan called. Slowly, the boy turned. His face was pale, his eyes empty. But the most unsettling thing? He wasn't breathing. Ethan stepped forward, but a deep, primal fear rooted him in place. Something was wrong. The boy just stood there, unmoving. Then, without warning, he vanished, gone, as if he had never been there. The radio crackled again. "You found me, but you can't bring me back." The voice was unmistakable. It was Noah's. Heart pounding, Ethan frantically searched the area. His boot caught on something in the dirt. Looking down, he saw a small, rusted locket buried in the mud. He picked it up and wiped away the grime. There was an engraving, 2004. His breath caught in his throat. That was the year the other boy had disappeared. Rushing back to the village, Ethan's face was pale. The moment the villagers saw him, they knew. Walter shook his head solemnly. "You saw him, didn't you?" Ethan hesitated. "Was he real?" Walter sighed. "Spirits with unfinished stories return, officer, but they're always destined to vanish again." Ethan spent the rest of the night searching. He returned to the spot, retraced his steps, even radioed for assistance. But there was no trace of the boy, no footprints, no sign of a struggle, just the locket in his hand, cold and rusted. He turned it over, a deep sorrow settling in his chest. If Noah was truly a spirit, why did he keep coming back? Was there something still unresolved? As the village returned to normal at sunrise, Ethan glanced back one last time. A strange unease lingered. He got into his patrol car and exhaled deeply. But then, from the corner of his eye, he saw something. There, standing at the tree line, was a small boy. This time, his eyes were filled with sadness. But just as Ethan blinked, he was gone.